Divers who spend a lot of time underwater, what's the creepiest, most unexplainable thing you've seen while in the depths? When I used to surf, I spent a good deal of time underwater, whether intentional or not. One day, I went out in surf that was absolutely massive. For me, it was 10 foot solid all day, bigger sets, serious stuff, and it was a very dark, overcast winter's day, and raining. You couldn't see shit above the water, let alone below. At this place, the bigger it gets, the further out on the rock shelf it breaks. So I was at least 200 meters from shore, when out of the gloom, towered an absolutely massive set, enormous, as biggest I'd ever encountered. There were only a handful of other blokes out there. The wave was mine. At this point, I wasn't scared at all. No, I wanted to get the biggest wave of my life, so I tried. I got onto it. But I just fucked up the position of my feet, ever so slightly. No chance of pulling out. So I tried to go with it, and that is when it happened. The scariest fucking water-based experience I ever had. I fell off, and this thing just took me to town. It lifted me all the way up and over the falls. I thought I was okay, but no, it was just beginning. It just kept pushing me down, further and further. My ears hurt badly. It was completely dark, cold, even in a wetsuit. I came to rest on what seemed to be a very large, smooth rock. I could feel it with my fingers whilst I was pinned firmly to it. I was held there for what seemed like an eternity, maybe 10 seconds. But then, I could sense with my feet a ferocious current that seemed to stop at the edge of the rock. It was trying to pull me over the ledge and down. I could hear it. At this point, I was panicking. Seriously, I can't quite remember how I escaped. I have rarely been that scared in all my life. I made it to the surface. I really thought I was going to pass out. I can't remember much more, but I must have paddled in so fucking fast. Other people noticed. They came to see what was the matter. I just sat on the beach. I could not even talk. I'm getting the fucking heebie-jeebies, even reading my own recollection. When I was a kid, we used to go to a place during the summer holiday, which had some very nice beaches, and in particular, an estuary, with a very wide river mouth. One summer, there was a king tide, where enough of the water emptied out of the river, into the ocean, that you could snorkel quite easily, from one side of the river mouth to the other, as it got so shallow, that it was only a meter or so deep, at the deepest part. One day, I decided to snorkel across from one beach to the one on the other side of the river, and about halfway across, where the depth to the bottom was maybe half a meter, I was swimming along the surface, looking down with my mask, snorkel on, and a massive stingray passed directly underneath me. This thing was easily 2 meters across, covered in white scars, and missing its tail. I just froze in the water, and it felt like my heart stopped. If I had have let my breath out, I would have dropped in the water low enough that I would have landed on it. It was so close. I wasn't in any danger. But having a massive creature appear so unexpectedly, so close up, was absolutely terrifying. Edit, to clear up some confusion, the stinger, also gone, just a sort of torn partial stump left of the tail. Two biggest, my buddy was taking pictures. He wanted one of me surrounded by a school of fish, so I started tossing out small pieces of hot dog. I was immediately surrounded by so many birch, I couldn't see out. All of a sudden, a large mouth base snagged one of the pieces of hot dog that was maybe 6 inches from my face. My mask blocked his approach, scared the crap out of me. The second one was a night dive, in very silty water. Visibility was less than 3 feet, lowest time mark. If I can't see my outstretched arm, it is more than 3 feet. We were near a flooded structure, maybe an old water tank. At about 35 feet, something was flashing from our lights. Suddenly, I'm covered in something, and I couldn't see my light reflecting back. I pull it off my face, but it is still black, and I can feel it touching the top of my head. I try over and over to free myself, but I don't feel caught, just covered. Finally, I get clear. It was a large, plastic trash bag. Keep your trash out of the water, please. One of our assistant instructors got bit on the head and dragged 5 feet or so by a sea bass at Casino Point while feeding the fish peas on our safety stop. He came out bleeding from his head, and everyone thought he hit his head on the reef. The trash bag one is super scary. I got told a story once by a Maori language teacher of mine during my time at high school. We didn't learn much Maori, just listened to stories. A dam in the Waikato, New Zealand had begun to have visible cracks in the concrete on the outside part of the dam, and some divers were organized to dive down and check the inside submerged part of the dam for damage on that side. While they were down there was the usual debris you would find behind a man-made wall, which prevents the water from flowing as it would normally do if there wasn't a dam there. Turns out what they thought were large logs were in fact huge eels which had gotten to the size of logs due to being prevented from migrating to the sea, where they breed and die. So from being prevented from doing their natural life duties, they just get larger and larger. That would be creepy, seeing eels deep down in the water, just floating around. I had a dive master that told me once he was diving somewhere and found a full skeleton wearing diving gear, with the air on the tank turned off pretty deep down. If I remember correctly, they said they reported it to the police, and it was found out the man's wife turned off his air while they were on a dive to murder him. A coworker of mine goes cave diving and says that, while not super common, you do find dead bodies in swim gear in caves sometimes. People either go too far into the cave and then run out of oxygen on the way back, or they squeeze past a tight gap and get stuck on the other side, unable to come back the way they came. Not unexplainable, but gave the a bit of a fright. I worked as a commercial diver for about 7 years in the UK, and also some work in Europe. I was working in Orkney, north of Scotland, on the fish farms. One time, I swam down one of the bigger nets off Rousay, and it was very dark, very overgrown, and I could see some weird shapes lying in the dead man's sock. As I descended, there were a few more dead fish than usual, maybe 100 or so, but underneath them were lying 3 dead seals, big ones. It was hard to make out, because they were covered in fish, but one of the seals had a big fucking chunk of it missing, and that's when I looked up and saw a 4-foot tear in the side of the net. Fuck that. I was only a newbie at this point. Fish farm work is generally the best way to start a diving career. Doesn't pay the best, but you get plenty of minutes logged, which helps for experience. I told the supervisor, who said get out straight away. They sent one of the more experienced lads in after me, and he fixed the hole sharpish, and then rigged the seals up to be lifted out. Turns out the seals had been killed by orca, and somehow got through the net in a panic. Orca are quite common up in Orkney, and are the only animal we were told you had to get out the water for, if seen. Only one of the seals had a bite mark, the other 2 got caught in the net. Not supernatural or anything, but I remember a significant shiver running down my spine that day. Edit. Whoa, more responses than I've ever had on a post. To answer the question about why orcas, I was told by one of the marine environment lads who used to regularly come out on the boats with us, that it's a precautionary thing, wearing black neoprene and fins. You may be mistaken for a seal, and become breakfast. To be fair, it's a precaution I was very happy to go along with. We don't get great white salt tiger sharks up here, but I'd imagine in South Africa, India, Australia, etc., there would be similar rules. I'm a commercial diver, and was once on a job cleaning a potable water reservoir. I'd been in other reservoirs before, but this was, by far, the biggest, at 40 by 80 meters. To get in, you had to open a hatch in the ground. The whole reservoir was underground, and climb down a ladder. The hatch was in a corner, so when you were in the far corner of the reservoir, it was completely pitch black. and you just had to hope your light didn't go out. I was about halfway through a 3-hour dive when the batteries in my torch started going flat. I watched the beam get narrower and dimmer until it cut out completely. It's not a huge problem if you lose light, as you can just follow your umbilical back to the hatch. Just as I started walking back, some obnoxiously loud banging started somewhere in the reservoir. I was the only diver in there, so it both confused and scared the shit out of me. Needless to say, I ran back to the hatch as fast as I could. I ended up getting my torch changed out and doing another hour in the water, but didn't hear the noise again. I still have no idea what it was, but the combination of my torch going out and loud banging coming from somewhere gave me a hell of a fright. My sister and I were recently swimming at a reservoir near our house. The water often gets above the designated levels, so trees become submerged by weight, and make perfect diving platforms. As my sister and I are climbing up a tree to jump off, we noticed a pair of abnormally large bubbles that kept coming up the surface and were moving in circles around us. We didn't think anything of it until they started moving much farther than they had been. Kind of spooked us, because you can't see anything below like 1 foot of water. Anyways, we kept swimming and forgot about it until about 10 minutes later, we had moved farther out from shore and see 2 scuba divers surface. Wasn't necessarily creepy, but just unsettling that they were down there the whole time, and we had no idea. Expected a large catfish, don't know why. Wasn't necessarily creepy, but just unsettling that they were down there the whole time and we had no idea. Sounds like those divers were the creepers. Yep, where was the dive flag? I feel that could have gotten dangerous very fast. I've done a number of dives, and the strangest thing I ever saw was a large deep freezer with a heavy industrial chain wrapped around multiple times, with about 5 cinder blocks attached. It was very, very rusted, and the deep freezer itself had to have been 30+ years old, probably more. This was about 90 feet deep, just off Vancouver Island, Canada. The situation gave myself and the other divers, the newbie GEBs, logged the GPS and depth coordinates, and notified the police. We were able to find out what was inside, since one of the divers had friends with local police. 10 porcelain dolls. Nice work. You have unleashed them from the watery prison that was protecting us all. From their AF, that's almost worse than finding out it was a body inside. So, 3 days ago, I went snorkeling off Nambu Island, in Zanzibar. Everything went normal, and we start heading back. I grab my net bag, and put my black fins, black mask, snorkel and black wetsuit inside. Once back ashore, I grab my bag, jump off the boat, and head to the rental office to return the equipment. At that point, I feel my bag is moving somehow. At first look, it seemed like a flat, black worm squirming quickly. After rotating the bag, I realized I was looking only at the tail of an otherwise 1 meter long black sea snake, one of the most venomous reptiles I could find, trying to get out of the net. How it got there, I have no freaking clue. I have 150+ dive, but can't say I've seen anything all that creepy. But I do have a cool dive story to share. I was diving the Blue Hole in Belize, and we were at max depth, which is 120 feet. It gets weird at that depth. The light level is getting pretty low, and it feels oppressive. You realize you're way down. There are some lemon sharks that swim around the Blue Hole. They are curious and like to check out divers, but they are harmless. They look mean as hell though, and can get 8 to 9 feet easily. At 120 feet, one of them decided to come check out me and my now ex-wife. She was a bit in front of me, but when she saw the shark beelining towards us, She quickly swam behind me and shoved me towards the shark. I was not expecting that, and it took a minute to process what happened, but I felt bad for her, more than anything. She was terrified for a few seconds. I laughed about it later, and said, at least I knew where I stood with her. She is a good diver, but the sight of that 8-foot shark swimming straight at her, with a mouthful of teeth, triggered her survival instincts. I didn't hold it against her. Smile. As I got shoved towards the shark, who was at that point only about 6 feet away from me, he calmly turned to the side and glided right past me, and then went on to check out some other divers. We started our ascent, and I didn't see him again. It was a very cool experience. Not a diver, but when I was surfing New Zealand's West Coast beach, I felt something wrap around my leg, so I looked down, and it was a fishing line, so I tried to pull it up, and then the line got heavy. I assumed it was a fish, but as I pulled the line closer, it got really heavy, and I began to sink, so I hooked on my board and paddled closer to shore. I slid off my board, and was in chest-deep water. My friend came over, cause he noticed something was wrong. We both pulled the fishing line in, and we saw a large silhouette in the water, so we dragged it to the surface, and it was a dead body. Someone rock fishing fell off the rocks last week, and was missing. There was a hook stabbed into his neck, and fishing line wrapped around his face, and dug into his skin. We brought the dude's body to the shore, and called in the lifeguards, then threw up, due to the fact the man was lacking eyes. This was a really interesting read. Sorry you had to see that, but thanks for sharing. I find the chance of that fishing line wrapping around your leg fascinating. You had to be in a certain place, at a certain moment, as the water moved in a particular way, to connect that line to you. Lacking eyes, bruh. Rescue, recovery diver here. Every time I've recovered a drowning victim, I get the creeps. Unfortunately, a lot of people are under the impression that every underwater environment is like the movies, and there's absolute clarity. That's rarely the case. One evening, I got called out for a young girl that jumped from a bridge. She likely survived the fall and entry. We have a morbid term for what happened to her upon hitting the water. Plugged. I found her, with a surprising amount of visibility in relatively shallow water. She was stuck in the mud, to just below her knees, and you could see the feel locked into her eyes. There's nothing peaceful about suicide by bridge. That is the most terrifying answer I've read so far. Thanks. With that out of the way, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon if you want more content to keep appearing in your subscription box. Thanks for watching, and until next time.